2024, of course, is drawing to a close, and it's been another incredible year of football across Europe. Bayern's reign of terror, for example, was finally ended. Jude Bellingham helped Real Madrid achieve La Decimoquinta, and Kylian Mbappe, well, eventually left PSG, and Lamine Yamal announced his arrival to the world at Euro 2024. And what an announcement that was. But what has been our highlight of the year on the continent? Well, today we're about to find out, as Andy and I will be hearing from some of our regular contributors who will be telling us about their highlights of 2024. But first, Andy, you may as well kick this one off. What was your highlight of the year?
Well, I feel as I'm kicking off, I should reel right back to the start of 2024 and go for Antoine Griezmann breaking Atletico Madrid's goal-scoring record. And it's been not an easy year for Antoine Griezmann. Of course, he came into 2024 on equal footing with Luis Aragonés as the club's top scorer of all time. Well, then went past that, scoring in the Supercopa against Real Madrid. And he's had a difficult year at various points in between. So injuries stymieing him for the first time really in his senior career, having a poor Euro 2024 with his retirement, shock retirement from the French national team, and then coming back to be important for Atletico again, and now approaching the 200 goal mark for Atletico Madrid, which is a mark that will be really, really difficult to beat. And I think it's a testament to his constance. And of course, I think he deserves to be at the top of that list because he's just such a symbolic player for Atletico. We've talked about it before. He's Diego Simeone on the pitch, really. You know, he's been the player who has been one of the key players, if not the key player, in Diego Simeone's whole tenure. Every time he talks about him, Simeone, in a press conference, it feels like he's going into eulogy about Griezmann, and it's everything, isn't it? The goals are only one aspect of it. There's the industry, the way he's the heart and soul of the team, and it would be nice if at some point, before he packs it in, he's got the record, he'll get the 200 goals. It would be really nice if he got himself a league title or a Champions League.
Yeah. We talk of him as Atletico Madrid player, but he was, as you've noted, also a very significant player for the French national team as well. And given, how successful that they've been, I wonder whether Antoine Griezmann has been overlooked somewhat in a team full of superstars, as the French always seem to have.
Well, I guess sometimes the thing is, because he's an enabler and he's a workhorse, that really changes the perception of him. I think you're right, because he is someone who is the most selfless of flair players. That is what has been behind his longevity for France, of course, with the record amount of consecutive appearances, with how he's kept Atletico going through various different stages, and how he went back there, of course, after it didn't completely work out at Barcelona. It maybe should have worked out at Barcelona, because I'm sure that industry, the idea of it meshing with Messi is a good idea. But I think really his heart, he wants to be a star player as well. So this record will mean an enormous amount to him.
Yeah, you went for Antoine Griezmann as your, breakout story, or your big story from 2024, the highlight of your year. Lars Siversen went for Bayer Leverkusen, winning the Bundesliga.
My highlight of the 2024 European football season, it has to be Bayer Leverkusen and their title win in the Bundesliga. Not just because of the drama, all the late wins and the sort of extraordinary narratives around that, but for me it was the incredible style and swagger with which they played, the way in which they deployed some clever recruitment and some really inspirational coaching, and became a team that was much more than the sum of their parts, even though, of course, some of those parts are rather exquisite. I mean, we're very lucky that we get to do this for a living, and we end up watching an absolute ton of football. And throughout the season, I'll admit, it can start to feel like a chore. You're heading into the weekend, and you have all these games you have to watch. But it never, like sitting down and watching Leverkusen, last season in particular it was never a chore of any kind. It was just always a thrill. They're so fun to watch, and the fact that they unseated Bayern finally in that kind of style, in that kind of manner, it was a wonderful, wonderful thing, and definitely my highlight of 2024.
Yeah, he's not wrong though. No. Let's not overlook that. Bayer Leverkusen, it was amazing. I mean, they essentially did a Napoli in a way, but in a different way to the way that Napoli did it. But they unseated, the usual suspect at the top.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you did get, I agree, a similar thrill that you got to when Napoli won the Serie A a couple of years back. And I think when you have that situation of emerging personalities and emerging styles who are going to go on and dominate European football, so for Kvaratskhelia and Osimhen, Reed, Florian Wirtz, Granit Xhaka, I suppose, coming back, and he was absolutely vital for them.
Not to talk
Victor Boniface.
Xabi Alonso, let's not forget, he's going to dominate European football for years.
Yeah, Alonso's the key in this. Lars was talking about the way that they played. Now, that wasn't the way that they played when Xabi Alonso arrived in October 2022. He talked to us about it like last year, and he said, well, look, I had this idea when I arrived to get us playing at a level where we could compete. And then I got us trying to get on the ball a little bit more. And finally, they end up at this natural endpoint where they can actually dominate games. But I think that's why Xabi Alonso is such an important coach and will continue to be an important coach wherever he goes in 2025, because my feeling is this will probably be his last year at Bayer Leverkusen, though they've provided such advantageous conditions for him in which to work, such optimal conditions in which to work. I don't think he feels like rushed out the door or anything like that. It's that he talks very passionately about the game, but he talks about the game with a slight newness, with a slight freshness. So unlike a lot of coaches, he doesn't put himself front and centre and say, my philosophy, this is my philosophy, this is my philosophy. He talks about it like he wants, rather than it to be a completely rigid system, he wants players to interpret a role. And also, he realises that philosophy has to be malleable. In that way, he's closer to someone like Carlo Ancelotti than a Jose Mourinho or even a Marcelo Bielsa or a Jorge Sampaoli, which it makes you think that he can adapt to any situation, any job. Now, obviously, if he were to go to Real Madrid, that would be the ultimate test of that. But like we said, let's not rush him out the door. For now, Leverkusen continue to be excellent to watch. I think they're one of the contenders for the Champions League going into this calendar year.
And you're starting for 10, which hip-hop coach famously said, I'm a philosopher. I think very deeply.
My guess would be KRS-One, but it's just a guess.
Well, it's not a bad guess. It is KRS-One. Well done. Yeah, no, genuinely, well done. Okay, easy.
I had to go full Bellingham for that.
Well, yeah, well done you. Nikki, we are so lucky at OTC to have her insight into what's not just what's happening in Italian football, but also what's going to happen. And for ages, she talked about Atalanta, did she not? Well, you can guess what her highlight of the year has been.
Oh, God, there's so many great moments you could pick for highlight of the year. I think with it being a Euro summer, my mind goes straight to that. And again, just in that one tournament, you could pick out all sorts of different things. Georgia beating Portugal at the end of the group stage to go through, that was huge. I suppose some people would say Albania scoring the fastest goal against Italy was probably a big moment too. Vitinha showing a yellow card to Michael Oliver. There was so much in that tournament. Like even Jude Bellingham's overhead kick feels like it's the wrong one for the On the Continent show. But listen, it was a moment, wasn't it? But for me, I think the highlight of 2024 just still has to be Atalanta winning the Europa League. And not just doing it, but deserving it and doing it against Bayer Leverkusen, who were 51 games unbeaten, just after they'd lost the Coppa Italia final against Juventus. A really meek display coming into that Europa League final, having as a club not won a final in 63 years, and lining up in attack with De Ketelaere, with Lookman, with Scamacca, just going for it, and then Lookman showing up on the big stage and just absolutely smashing it, as they had all through the knockout stage, as they did at Anfield, as they did against Marseille in the semi-final. Like, they could not have deserved it more as a club. And so for me, Atalanta, Gasperini finally getting their reward for all the incredible work that club has done in the last few years, that has to be the highlight for me.
Yeah, and they're continuing this amazing run of form in Serie A as well, domestically.
Yeah, they are, Dotun, and we've talked on recent podcasts about what a surprise that is to me, at least, that they've been able to build on that. And I think part of the surprise around that is because, as Nicky says, it felt like the Europa League final performance was untoppable, because it was against the best team in Europe last season, in Bayer Leverkusen, and there were so many moments where, even though they were up against it, Leverkusen would have normally recovered, but Atalanta just didn't give them a chance to. It was the perfect plan by Gasperini. It required extraordinary energy to press Leverkusen that hard at that stage in the season, and that is one of the many reasons why it was an uncommonly good final performance. Because normally we talk about tension and nerves affecting teams in finals. It's also a case of sometimes there's just not that energy after 55, 60 games to give your best, most expansive performance in a final. But as she says, Ademola Lookman, outstanding. I'm sure that made a massive contribution to him winning the African Player of the Year award, which was totally deserved. And, you know, who knows where he can go from here, still in his 20s and obviously still very ambitious. Maybe even a Serie A winner later this year. We'll have to wait and see. But I think as well, from that Europa League final, what people finally realise is how strong Atalanta are throughout and what a developer of players they are in general. Because I think you look at the players who really stood out as well. Scalvini, of course. Ederson was brilliant in midfield, who wouldn't have been a familiar name to that many people who don't watch Serie A regularly before that. So a bit of a hint in there of how Atalanta had that strength to build and recover from the difficulties they faced at the beginning of the following season.
Nicky mentioned the Euros there, and sometimes we can't overlook huge tournaments like that. David Cartilage, who is, as much as anything, our Spanish football expert. Not the only one, of course, but he covers everything across Europe. He's got, such a wide remit, I suppose, in his footballing landscape as a journalist. He has gone for, well, I'll let him tell you.
I think if I had to pick a moment in football from 2024, it would be at Euro 2024, and as much as I want to say Ollie Watkins' goal, I'm going to go with Georgia. I think to see a nation come into a tournament ranked 74th, I believe it was the lowest of any team there, to come and play this thrilling, expansive, entertaining, fearless football was magnificent. And we saw, even though they only won one game, it felt like more. It felt like the way that they delivered their performances every single time, when they shone as individuals, as a team, it really, really stood out. And it went against the grain of what I think a lot of football has become and currently is. Mamadashvili saves, the heroics there, Kvaratskhelia stepping up and leading his team as the biggest star in the team. And then we had Mikatadze as well, who not many people knew about, coming in and just surprised a lot of people. It was remarkable, and that was a moment that will absolutely always stick with me.
Yeah, a highlight is usually something that you don't expect, or you don't expect even to that level. I don't think many of us expected Georgia to come out of the blocks being, in some ways, the minnow of the tournament.
No, and I think that's right to point that out, because a lot of people expected that if Georgia were to do well, or to do anything really, that it would be a case of them being carried on the shoulders of Kvisha Kvaratskhelia. And he had a good tournament. but it was by no means a solo effort. I mean, I think what worked in their favour is what didn't work in Kvaratskhelia favour for most of the season. Now, we saw players of very, very varying physical condition in the Euros for a lot of reasons, mainly to do with the workload in the calendar. But Kvaratskhelia had a bit of a false start to the season because he was injured in pre-season, so he was starting from a disadvantage. He had a difficult first part of the season because of that. But what that kind of meant is he had a little more in the tank than others would have, perhaps at the back end of the season. But I think we saw in Mamardashvili, as David name-checked there, maybe the outstanding goalkeeper of the tournament. He was fantastic. Of course, been signed by Liverpool now, and will join them in summer 2025. So, whether that's a replacement for Alisson, whether him and Kevin Kelleher will be battling for the number one spot, who knows? But Mamardashvili's been great for Valencia for a really long time and really showed to the world how good he is in these Euros. And then we mentioned Mikatadze as well. And here is a player who's had a really difficult career. He's had to battle to get to the top. Of course, he was rejected by his hometown club Lyon when he was a kid. Really built his reputation at Metz. Then had this move to Ajax that didn't really work out. And at that point where he couldn't get in the Ajax team at the start of 23-24, you never would have bet a penny on him starring at Euro 2024. So back to Metz. Great second half of the season in a side that was eventually relegated. And he just showed what he's about. He's a very, I suppose, quite unusual type of striker for modern day football, in that he's neither a target man nor super implicated in play outside of the penalty box, but in some quite old-fashioned attributes that he has in terms of excellent movement and ability, and just a really natural finisher. Now, we've increasingly seen that as he's been used more by Lyon as the season has gone on. But for me, when you saw the variety of goals he scored for Metz in the first half of 2024, that he was able to make the most of limited opportunities, because Georgia were never going to create that much at Euro 2024, really underline just how good he is and just what a special talent he is. And maybe Georgia can build on that. I think it's one of those moments that, and it's always fun for me, I guess it is for you as well, when you see a team that's not been in a major championship before taking part. It's the best bit for me of any World Cup or European Championship, that sense of discovery and adventure. And without the expanded European Championship, you don't get that.
Yeah, I think it was remarkable Euros, but Kvaratskhelia, why I loved him so much is just 23 years old. He had the nation's hopes on his shoulders. It's a lot. I know what you say about his year at Napoli not being everything that perhaps it should have been, and there was all that issue about whether they were going to keep him, etc. But when it came to the Euros, and the whole nation is dependent upon you. We've seen that with English footballers, I dare say, as well. You carrying the whole nation's hopes on your shoulders. That's a big ask.
Yeah, and it's something that Lars, who's spent time in Georgia, has talked about. He said, if you're in Tbilisi on the night when Napoli are playing on TV, like the noise from like adjoining apartments and houses is amazing, And I think for a country of Georgia's like limited football stature, to have a player who's legitimately one of the best in the world and played a massive role in a team that hadn't won a Serie A title for a generation, winning it, it's amazing. Like, his emergence was incredible. And obviously there were going to be, as you say, still quite young, there were going to be those sort of growing pains as like his status rose and expectations rose. But all in all, he's kind of working it out, isn't he?
Yeah, and JJ in Paris, our French, I suppose, football expert, but he covers everything as well, JJ, like all of our pundits do. Well, he went for this as his highlight of 2024.
Hi guys, JJ popping in from Paris. Wish everyone a Merry Christmas and all the best coming into 2025. Not just to the OTC team, but to our listeners as well. It's always a privilege to be part of the gang, so thanks to you too. Now, I was tempted by Aston Villa for my moment of the year, returning to the Champions League for the first time in donkey's years. But no, I've gone for something closer to home, related to French football, and it has to be Brest's incredible 2024 as my pick of this year's moments. Finishing third in Ligue 1 itself was arguably a miracle, but to not only make it to the Champions League's inaugural league phase, but actually to compete and be on the verge of a knockout place with the top 8 still possible, seriously, it's up there with some of the best examples of sporting overachievement in recent years, in my opinion. Important players have gone, even if there were no real key individuals to begin with, and Eric Roy has done a stunning job leading those players. Brest have reminded us that the traditional collective football values still count, and that you can still compete at European level with a well-constructed squad and a group of players prepared to play for each other. 4 wins and a draw from 6 games in a first ever European outing. It's the definition of scenes. The fairy tale arguably already has its happy ending too, with the money that a knockout spot brings going a long way towards ensuring that their new stadium plans did not suffer due to French football's TV rights crisis back in the summer. As long as they don't get dragged into a relegation battle in Ligue 1, Brest's Champions League adventure has already been a resounding success. Bring on 2025, guys.
Indeed. Andy, you followed French football very closely yourself. How impressed were you with Brest's season?
It's a miracle. There's no getting around it. And JJ's right to underline Eric Roy, the coach as well. But, you know, sometimes in modern football, and particularly from an English perspective, we sometimes reach for the word. We don't know whether to say coach or head coach or manager, because the role has changed over the years. You get very few old style managers, the guy who does everything, the absolute top dog. Because
Harry Bassett.
Yeah, exactly. There's the real one. Or as Sir Alex Ferguson or an Arsene Wenger, or even a Brian Clough, who doesn't really get involved that much in the coaching. But because transfers are more complex, there's more money involved, there's more different parties involved. You need a sporting director, you need a technical director, you need maybe a head of recruitment, you need all those different things in place to help the coach to coach the team. But I think Eric Roy is quite an authentic manager in the old style. And I'm not just saying this because Brittany has all these British links and links to the British Isles, but with him, he's someone who's been a sporting director before. He's sporting director at Watford. He's someone who was away from the game for a bit. And when he came back, it was only meant to come back to Brest as a sort of short-term fix, really. We're talking about a year and a half or so ago to save them from relegation. It went so well, they kept him on. And my God, if he didn't qualify them for the Champions League, it's amazing. But I think with a club of that size, and we've seen as they've struggled to cope with some elements on the pitch, as JJ says, they've been brilliant in the Champions League, but it's not been an easy road because they weren't allowed to play at home at the François Leblay because they have a couple of semi-permanent stands. UEFA don't allow that in UEFA club competition and not in the Champions League. So they had to go and play an hour down the road at Guingamp, and where, of course, Didier Drogba and Florent Malouda really made their names. And now they're looking, because things have gone so well, they're looking at where they might play for the next stage. Might even be at the Stade de France in the knockouts, which would be extraordinary. There are a lot of Bretons in Paris, so that would probably work for them in terms of the crowd. And really, I think it would be a platforming of their football miracle to the rest of France. And the way they've represented France has been very, very worthy. But the fact that Eric Roy, at that size of club, I don't think you can get away with just being a coach. Of course, he does have a sporting director and further support. But I think the fact that he's seen it from both sides, a little bit like Marco Silva of Fulham, to understand what the sporting director's job is as well as what the coach needs, it helps give you more of a widescreen view about not just what the team but the club requires. And so it's sort of helped them this summer when they've had to look at, sort of regroup without some of those big players that went on. And JJ was talking about it. You know, the big one really to go was Lilian Brassier, the centre back, who's absolutely terrific and has gone over to Marseille. They lost a couple of forward players in Meunier and Satriano. But I think to not just work that out, but understand how to deal with the team on a psychological level, knowing that it was going to be an incredible emotional effort to compete in the Champions League and Liga. And that's why JJ talked about them staying away from the relegation battle. Look, they're not going to finish in the European qualification positions in this campaign because the workload is simply too much and they don't have the squad for it. But I think the way that he's handled the squad, so he's known the moments to say, right, these boys are knackered, I'm going to give them a little bit of space and a little bit of love. And then when they played a Champions League game and they've not really turned up in the next game and, you know, they've played poorly, I think of a defeat at Auxerre earlier in the season, he's just come out and gone, come on, this is just unacceptable. We hold ourselves to higher standards of this and than this, and we expect better than this. He's got an intrinsic feel for when to use the carrot and when to use the stick, which I think is really important. And, you know, we've seen lots of teams before who have overachieved, got into a Champions League position and not been able to deal with it at all. When you compare that and the fact that they've lost a few key players as well, which is, you know, natural for a club of that size that's had an incredibly successful season, that he's found the right balance and they've managed not just to compete, but really succeed in the Champions League is an enormous credit to him, as well as, you know, some of those players like Roman Del Castillo and Julien Le Cardinal, who has been brilliant for them.
So that's it. That was the footballing year that was 2024. All we have to look forward to now is next year.
But before we go, hang on. What's your highlight of the year? You're not getting away that easily.
Oh, thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. Thank you very much for asking.
Oh, you're welcome.
I have to go back to what Nicky said earlier on, that you can't get away from the Euros. Do you know what the incredible thing, and you did tell us about this, you did say, I'll give you the props, you said, watch out for the teenagers, mate. And I don't know if I've ever seen a tournament where the teenagers owned it, you know, really owned it, didn't let anybody down. And I'm talking Arda Güler, that I'd never really seen play, Real Madrid player, Turkey, he bossed the game for Turkey, and I can see them with a bright future. And of course, you talked often enough, as we did on OTC, about Jamal Musiala, but you wait to see if he can do it for Germany. And yes, he could do it with, you know, loads and loads of room to spare. And of course, the two youngsters for Spain as well didn't disappoint at all. Spain ended up winning the whole thing, of course, not least because of their younger players in Nico Williams and, for me in particular, Lamine Yamal. That's not taking anything away from Nico Williams, but the fact that he was a teen, you couldn't believe it. You know, you're watching.
Well, he celebrated his 17th birthday at the tournament. Disappointingly, not with a football cake. You know, that's what you normally get at that sort of age, like a sponge football with a.
He obviously didn't make the decision on the cake, but he was amazing. And look, I can't wait for 2025 when these youngsters learn to drive. And that's it for On the Continent in 2024. This is really it now. Thank you so much for all your support throughout the year. We love making this show and we absolutely love it and couldn't do it without you. So thank you. We hope you're having an amazing Christmas and we wish you a very happy New Year when the time comes. We'll be back next year, of course, Thursday, January the 2nd, when we will start looking ahead to what we should expect from football in 2025. Join us then, and as always, make sure to subscribe in your podcast app so that you never miss an episode.